I won't say your official title because it's Dr. Sally Ann Law, but I just know you as Sally Ann. So Sally Ann, welcome to the lockdown sessions. How are you?
Yes, I'm really well, thanks, Brad. It's great to see you today, and I'm happy to take part. I've seen a couple of ones that you sent, so it's great to do it.
Listen, as a personal and executive coach, I have been really excited about this actually, because what I'm happy to share is that we've known each other since like 2004 was the first time I met you.
Wow.
And since then, I viewed you, I was just mentioning offline to you, as my mentor and coach, and you've been my business coach and my kind of mental health savior. Because I put, yes, well, you'll be humble about it, but I put you've helped me grow my business as a business coach. So great PR for anyone who's looking to help scale a business up. Sally Ann is the person you want to see. But as a professional and executive coach and my coach, I thought, wow, this would be really cool. Can I get you to come on this and have a conversation? Because actually, I've always looked up to you to help me. And you have such a wide variety of clients because you work both personally and professionally. So you're mixing with people in that private life and also the corporate market. I thought maybe you'd have some really interesting contexts and perspectives of observations that you've made during this strange, weird, ever-changing landscape that we're in COVID.
Yeah.
So my opening gambit to everyone is the same, and then we kind of jam and riff from there.
Okay.
so here we go. Here's your starter for 10.
Okay.
From your perspective, as you look out at both personal and professional clients, what have been some of the observations that you've seen, people's behavior, the way they've been responding to lockdown?
Well, I have to say and probably unsurprisingly, I think it's sort of an ever-moving landscape. It sort of changes over time. I think at the beginning, probably not surprisingly, because a lot of my clients are, very good at sorting things out and getting on with things. There was a lot of lots of people were talking in, determinedly positive ways and determined to stay resilient, determined to make the best of it, determined to do everything they could to protect their businesses and their families, and that seemed to get us through a good couple of months of lockdown, maybe even a bit longer. But then I sort of did start to notice the general mood shifting, unfortunately, a bit downhill, where people were clearly, just running out of steam and struggling. And so I found myself, I always take time off in towards the end of July and August. And I thought I'm really glad I'm going to be taking off fairly soon, because I found that it was much tougher doing my work in that last bit of time, because it seemed that people just needed much more of a sort of a cheerleading thing, as well as the discussion, the coaching work. And really, I'm not a cheerleader, I definitely want to support and encourage and motivate people, but I felt like, oh my God, I have to first give an awful lot in terms of just boosting people's, sense of self and sense of, it's okay. And so I think that then there was the sort of easing up of lockdown, and there was the summer weather, and people were seeing, I think, a bit more of their family and trying to find ways to do a little bit of traveling, even if it was staying in this country. And I don't know how it's been with your clients since September, but when I first came back working again in September, everybody seemed to be quite buoyant. But I'm afraid, this sort of, where are we? What does it mean, this partial lockdown? My clients are scattered. Some of them are in different parts of the world, never mind different parts of the country. But I think, unsurprisingly, people are finding it quite difficult, now again.
I found here in the UK, I found a distinct difference between my public sector clients and my private sector clients.
Okay.
A lot of the public sector clients were still very frontline.
Yeah.
They were going into work, local authorities, frontline services. They couldn't stop doing that.
Yeah.
And there was a kind of resilience in them at the beginning that definitely waned towards the summer, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah.
The corporate clients, I've seen a lot of them, especially when they're global in nature, just blanket say no one's coming back into the office till next March.
Yeah.
So just let's live with it. I've seen some companies give rest days to their staff, give back days, they call them, where they insist people take 4-day weekends.
Yeah.
Putting an extra $1,000 in their paycheck at the end of every 3 months to help pay for a phone bill, or maybe do up their office at home.
Yeah.
And then I'm speaking to people in Paris who are husband and wife, let's say, or a couple in an apartment with 2 kids homeschooling. An apartment in Paris is tiny, no garden, no balcony, 2 screaming kids. And they were pulling their hair out in the middle of March, quite frankly. So it seemed that in the corporate market, the private sector, everything seemed okay. Everyone go home, work as best you can. We'll furlough those that we can, and the rest will crack on.
Yeah.
I've noticed as well since September that there was almost a nervousness coming towards the clocks going back, the dark winter ahead. And I was wondering whether actually, and you mentioned the word before, I keep hearing it, resilience. And I'm wondering if actually it's endurance we need now.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you're familiar with an article that a client of mine actually shared with me. I wrote the name of the woman down because I knew I'd forget. Her name's Ayesha Ahmad. She's an international security scholar. And she, there was an article published, I think, the Sunday Telegraph a few weeks ago. And it was called the 6-month wall. And what she had sort of experienced with herself and with a lot of her colleagues who do very difficult assignments in sort of conflict zones is that after about 6 months, people run out of steam. So this idea of, to your point about endurance, they just sort of hit the wall in the same way as runners do running a marathon. And so she was saying, listen, if you're feeling this, because it's kind of 6 months in now, please don't panic. Please don't worry. I think this is normal. And you will come out of this in the same way as a runner breaks through the wall, usually when they're running a marathon. You have got the endurance. You have learned things from the first 6 months, which you will now be able to apply. And, this is a normal thing that you're feeling. So take heart. It feels like you've run out of steam, but in actual fact, you probably haven't. And you'll discover that the coping mechanisms and skills that you built up in the first 6 months, you will be able to reapply them. And actually, it won't be nearly as bad as you think it is. So I'm hoping that's going to turn out to be true.
I worry a little bit for those people who are naturally more inclined to think negatively as a starting point, because my sense is that those people I know who have very positive dispositions, yes, we can be resilient, and even if it was a little happy go clappy at the beginning, that resilience, that kind of bounce back ability, it seemed okay. The endurance piece now, even if it's a marathon, I used to run ultras. I mean, those were 50 and 100 Ks, but at least I knew there was an end. Right. So if I was in pain at 65 kilometers, that's okay. A couple of bottles of Lucozade, walk for 5 kilometers, and then pick up. Because there's an end in sight. 2 hours more running, Brad, and it will be over. My concern is today, and maybe with your insight would be interesting. My concern is that with no end in sight, does that trigger more nervousness, more anxiety? Because it's that uncertainty that then plays havoc with the negative mindset.
I think that's a huge factor, really, this idea, because I think as humans, you know, we are not all, we're always on a continuum. Some of us are just naturally, for lots of reasons, genes and learned experiences, etc., kind of on the more helpful end of the continuum, but we can pretty typically all bear quite a bit of adversity, as long as you say, you know, we can see the end in sight. I think you're right. When we can't see the end in sight, then suddenly it's a very different ball game. I feel, and I hope I'm not just being completely naive and, you know, unduly optimistic about this, that, you know, there's an end. It's just not necessarily nameable and therefore not in sight. But I think we have to keep telling ourselves that it's not going to stay like this. It's already not staying like this. Yeah. So I think we've got to keep going with that message. We have no alternative, and I think it's right. You know, we are going to find a vaccine, surely, hopefully. Of course, we could talk about, well, maybe it won't last long, and, you know, all the things we can, for everything that we think will be helpful, we can think of a few reasons why it's not going to be helpful enough, but that doesn't really do us any good. So I think in terms of managing our thoughts, wherever possible, we just have to turn the spotlight away from that sort of bleak, where the hell's the end, and I don't know where it's going to be, and what if there isn't one, because, you know, yeah, you're right, that will really be hard to live with.
And I'm reminded when you speak, actually, because it was something that you highlighted for me a few years back. I remember in one of our sessions, and actually I adopted it as a phrase and use it with my clients. So I should put a little post-it at the bottom of any of my sessions, aka Salian law. Because you talk to me a lot about unhelpful behaviors and helpful behaviors, and it feels to me as though this is a really relevant time for that. Yeah. People are adopting unhelpful behaviors, which they may very easily get sucked into. Mm-hmm. And if they could just see that they were unhelpful, you can then shift them, because it was such a pivotal moment for me when I remember sharing a story with you about some of the things I was doing, and you just asked me, are those helpful?
Oh, I'm glad I thought to ask you that question.
Yeah, but you know, the beauty of a great coach is it's the simple questions. And I can still remember sitting on your sofa in the room and thinking, no, it's not helpful. And so your follow-up question was, well, how do you stop the unhelpful behaviors and find some new helpful ones?
And hurry up about it. Yes.
Get on with it.
Yeah.
But and I joke about it. You know, in the moment, it was a sad discussion. I feel when I look out at people's behavior right now that I see a lot of unhelpful behaviors. Mm-hmm. Example, I see, you know, my mum on a daily basis when I talk to her reel off how many new cases, how many deaths.
Yeah.
Either she's watching the BBC News or Sky News, or she's on her app.
Yeah.
And I don't know how often a day she's looking at that so that she can reel off those numbers.
Yeah.
But our phone calls start with, it's not looking good out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's an unhelpful behavior. And I know she's not alone.
Yeah.
And it's not, you know, I don't think it's just because she's in her late 70s and been shielding. It's people of all ages that are doing this. I wonder, are there ways people can help themselves trigger out of these unhelpful behaviors?
Well, I think there definitely are, you know, and you and I probably both know that, you know, CBT is you know, that's a lot of what when you're working through the sort of a cognitive behavioral therapy sort of model, that's one of the things you're looking to try and help people do. And I guess at the heart of the efficacy of that approach is either the person themselves realizes, oh shit, this is not a helpful behavior. It's a coping mechanism that's gone wild, and now it's turned into something that's just really dysfunctional for me. Or if they haven't got to that point themselves, a conversation with somebody else, like a coach or a therapist or a friend, can ideally get them to the point of agreeing, as you said you did, with themselves, that okay, this is not helping. This helped at the beginning, and I did it for a while, and now this is turning into something that is dragging me down and holding me back, and it's taking a lot of time and energy, and therefore I haven't got the time and energy to do the things that would be helpful to me, because this thing is sucking the time away from me. So I think first is awareness, whether it's somebody hits upon it themselves or through a conversation with someone else. So for your mum, I guess, that would, and I'm sure you're doing everything you can to try and help her, wean her off all those tendencies that are actually tripping her up. But it's not easy, because all these things always start out as quite legitimate, rational coping mechanisms, which is why it's hard to wean people off them.
Right. I just, if I could go round to my mum, I would just delete the app from her phone, because she wouldn't know how to put it back on without asking me how to do it. And she listens to these sometimes. As a proud mum, of course, right? So she won't mind me giving her a shout out. But I have had many conversations where she'll call me up and ask me, do I know her password for Brad, what's my password for Amazon Prime? Mum, come on. Don't know your password. But I'm also genuinely interested in behaviors, and how, from a business point of view, behavior impacts bottom line. And something else that's I've been thinking of in considering our conversation today, and I was wondering, psychological safety. That's a big one. You mentioned that the article by this woman Ahmad, and I work with security service-based organizations and health organizations. And it's interesting, because the security services, they're all back in the office, right? I mean, these are people who've worked on the front line of war. They've left the military and now they're working in security, but they're all in their offices. And I had a conversation with one director. She's out in Dubai. She's like, I don't understand why they won't come into the office. And it's like, well, you have to be a little empathic.
Yes. Yes.
That psychological safety. I mean, when you think of some of the conversations you're having, how do you create an environment where, as a leader, you can create the safety for people to come back or to stay at home? But I feel as though leaders need to step forward in this moment and step out and help others. And I don't know if they're doing a great job across the board of helping people feel safe.
I think I'm with you on not necessarily terribly well. I think I suppose in their defense, they didn't sign up for being a leader of a group or a company in a COVID situation, in a pandemic situation. So, there's a bit of a fair enough about that. I think what has, a big question, and I think a lot of people are going to be writing a lot of PhD theses on this, is, actually what the hell are the attributes of a good leader? What matters more than anything? And I suppose, having people want to work with you and do their very best and be happy to be working with you and for you and with each other and feel engaged. It's something around that, I think, being a good leader. And unfortunately, I think this situation has, has highlighted that a lot, that with a bunch of structural and contextual things that have been taken away, a lot of people haven't been being very inspiring leaders. And in fact, they're causing, I mean, amongst a lot of my clients, a lot of anxiety is around, well, how am I being judged? You know, my leaders, the founder or my team leader is saying, you know, oh, of course, you know, well, some of them are saying, you know, of course, don't come in if you're not feeling comfortable. But subtext in parentheses, but actually in big shouty capital letters is, I expect to see you in on Monday.
Yeah.
You know, other people are just saying, I expect to see you in on Monday. And then other people are saying, you know, of course, and seeming genuine, you know, of course, and are genuine. Please don't feel like you have to put yourself in jeopardy. But if half the team are going in and you're opting, you're in maybe even the minority that is saying, well, actually, for one or two reasons, I would prefer not to come in. Then I won't. But those people are dealing with all kinds of things about, well, what conversations am I really missing out on? And, you know, and what's going on when once the Zoom meeting's over, here's me back at home and here they are wandering off to get a coffee together, and probably the real stuff's getting talked about now. So people are having, you know, a lot of anxiety around that.
And for me as well, it leads straight on from that, because I was having a conversation with a group of leaders, actually. So we were having a chat, and I raised the issue of how are they developing intimacy with their people right now.
Yeah.
And we were looking at trust, because, you know, I can prove my credibility to you working from home.
Yeah.
And I can be reliable working from home. So I can get the job done, I can do it well, and I can prove to you that working from home is fine.
Yeah.
But real trust doesn't get built in a Zoom call.
No.
Trust gets built when we're walking from the business meeting room to the elevator, going down, grabbing a coffee, and coming back up again.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's intimate. We have those moments, and it can be 2 minutes that we're together.
Exactly.
But the consistent 2 minutes that we have build that level of intimacy. And I'm wondering with leaders, you know, there's a great leader I work with. He's a VP, he's Italian, he works for a high-tech company. In his coaching over the last year and a half, he has just thrown himself into unpicking himself.
Yeah.
I mean, he's made himself vulnerable. He shared everything with his team. He's totally collaborated with his leaders. He's like a pin-up person for what coaching can do.
Yeah.
And he brought his team together and he said, look, guys, before we come back to the office, I want all of you to tell me what we need to do to make it safe.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say anything. I just want you guys to tell me what we need to do as a team. I mean, it was beautiful the way he described it.
Yeah.
And then in the coaching session one-on-one, he's saying to me, you know, Brad, I need the team to get back and start seeing clients.
Mm-hmm.
How can I ask them to get on a plane when my wife is saying to me, please don't get on a plane and start traveling everywhere all over again? And that role modeling, that leading by example, that building intimacy and showing vulnerability, these for me are the qualities now. But if leaders aren't showing them, I don't know if people are going to buy into them as leaders. I think we need our leaders to be vulnerable and not be, well, you know, I'm in the office.
Well,
I don't know, maybe I'm being overly hard on people who are maybe trying to be resilient and show endurance. So, you know,
I think it speaks. The question there is, what's the motive? So if somebody is genuinely thinking, as a leader, I really need to appear resilient, and that's why I'm doing it, then we'd have to have some empathy for that, because they're doing it for a good reason, right?
You know about me and empathy, Sally, and we spent time talking about my lack of it.
Well, look, you can mention that. I'm certainly not going to do that on this podcast.
But yes, you're right, because we do need to understand that at least they've approached that subject.
Yeah.
But showing vulnerability as a leader, we're not talking about, I hear Simon Sinek talk about it all the time on his podcast, show vulnerability as a leader. It kind of depends on the culture of the organization as
exactly.
how easy that is to do.
First of all, because I think if you're going to pick a strategy, if you're going to try and give some thought and consider it, consider how I want to be as a leader. So therefore, what am I going to do? That's great, but the context has to allow it, and it has to then appear and land in an authentic way. And you can be as lovely and show your vulnerability in your own little team or your own little bubble or with your own favorite people. But if the the prevailing culture is one of vulnerability equals weakness, good luck getting much positive impact from that. And also there is a question of how safe it is for that person to show their vulnerability, and so then if you keep unraveling it, then you have to, the question is, well, if you want to be that leader and you feel would be helpful to your team and that's what you want to try, and yet the company culture in which you work doesn't allow it, should you be there? For everything there's the next question and the next question. But I think this sort of what we've all been going through has exposed a lot of this in ways that we hadn't seen before.
I felt it myself, even in my own family unit. I had Charlotte call me out back in May when she highlighted to me, was I aware that I was running for like an hour and a half every day?
Okay.
And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, well, you come in from work and, you go for a run, but you're out for like an hour and a half.
Right.
What's that about?
She's good.
Yeah, right.
Terrifyingly good.
Yeah, and it was, and actually what I hadn't observed or noticed in that moment was I was a little bit down.
Yeah.
And running makes me feel good, and sort of physical fitness helps mental fitness.
Yeah.
I subscribe to that a lot.
Yeah.
But actually, I was just running.
Yeah.
Just running and running.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly, running. And it took her to call it out.
But you see, again, that's a perfect example of a super rational and helpful and healthy coping mechanism that she had spotted and you had tripped over into being something a little bit not quite right anymore.
Yeah. Whereas I was enjoying, adding on my run keeper, there's another 15.5 kilometers. I'll be smashing that 2,000 kilometer goal I set for this year.
Yeah.
But actually, what I was doing was I was completely ignoring the fact that I was working 12 hours a day.
Yeah.
And I didn't have the energy for the family in the evening.
Yeah.
And so what I was doing, pretending that it was going to give me energy for the family in the evening,
yeah.
was I was going out running for an hour and a half.
Yeah. Yeah. And not being with the family for an
Correct.
hour and a half. Yeah.
Correct. So by the time I got back and I've had a shower and then I've walked the dog, actually it's 9:30 and I'm exhausted.
It's pretty much bedtime, yes, and the whole evening worked for you, yes.
Yeah, how does that feel, family? Yeah, good job, Brad. Good.
And how is that empathy development going, Brad?
I do remember asking you one time if did you believe you could fake empathy, and your shock and laughter at me has stayed with me, where I've often shared that story in workshops when people have said that they can fake empathy, and I just shook my head and said, no, Well, maybe you can fake empathy once, but I don't know if you can fake it on a sustained basis. I'm
Yeah,
sure there are people who can go into a scenario, into a setting,
yeah,
and they meet somebody once, they fake the empathy for an hour,
exactly.
and then they leave.
Yeah.
I don't know if you could be in an environment with somebody on a daily basis and you could fake empathy. But I remember asking you, as a coach, could I fake empathy?
No, yes,
And
I think
you shook your head at me.
it's not a winning strategy with anyone for whom you have like ongoing relationships.
But to that point, someone highlighted, I thought beautifully for me, because I asked him, did he think we were all, someone had said to him we were all in the same boat right now. And I had been talking about actually what I was enjoying about the pandemic, if you can say enjoyed, was the fact that there was an opportunity for global empathy.
Right.
All, for the first time in multi-generations,
Yeah.
the first time the whole world was experiencing something at the same time. If ever there was an ability for us to be empathic with our neighbor, it was now. And I don't know if you noticed this in London where you're based, but I know here in the sticks, I saw some beautiful signs and exhibition of compassion at the beginning of this.
Yeah.
And I was heartened by the way people were behaving in my village, on our Facebook page, offering help to people who were struggling. I offered free sessions to anyone, any psychotherapy sessions to anybody who was challenged during lockdown.
Yeah.
Just ping me on Facebook,
Yeah.
and you just need your phone or a computer, and I would have had a conversation with them to see if there was any way to offer support. And I loved the way the community worked. And then as months have gone by, that's kind of dissipated. And this colleague said to
Yeah.
me, we're not in the same boat. We're in the same storm.
Yeah, well, that's good way of putting it. I have to say, thanks to you, actually, I signed up to do that NHS coaching.
Cool.
I spotted that on Facebook, on LinkedIn, I think. So thank you for that.
Oh, good.
But I think, in a way, we were in the same boat, or we are in the same storm. That's damn true. That's a good way of putting it. We were never really in this, there's lots of boats, and we're in a big boat with some people who are in similar situations, but we don't really need to spend much time saying some people are in really tiny boats that are extremely ill equipped for this, and we can't imagine really. We can have a good guess how difficult it must be, but yeah. So I kind of found that, I think towards the beginning of it all, there was a lot of analogies being made about the war spirit and how everybody pulled together in the war and everything. Whereas I didn't really think that was necessarily, an apt comparison, because, it was there were different things going on. Pubs and restaurants and cinemas didn't close down, and so people didn't lose their livelihoods who weren't, there was of course a lot of pulling together and rationing and helping families who, being kind and super kind to people who's got terrible news about their loved ones being killed abroad and things like that. That was all true, but there wasn't such a terrible hit on people's livelihoods as this. And so I think that's been a really big difference. And that's ongoing, that's the thing that's ongoing.
And I think there's a question then that springs to my mind, because as leaders, often leaders are already in a position of not just authority, but normally heightened salary.
Yeah.
And therefore the ability to empathize with those people who are maybe on hourly rates, or more menial jobs, or the color of their collar might be different. I don't know. I see a lack of empathy now right across the globe. In fact, it upsets me a little bit that we seem to have almost lost patience. All that compassion and community spirit that seemed to be there in March, I don't know, it seems to have disappeared.
Well, I think that we have to perhaps see it as a little bit in the same way as, you know, we look at willpower. You know, we know that willpower, you know, it's finite. We have only got so much of it. And if we're, say, for instance, trying to go cold turkey stopping smoking cigarettes by willpower alone, then we're not going to have much willpower left to do other things. And I think these sorts of things like compassion and empathy, they're a bit in that same category of, we need to be able to replenish them, and we need the conditions to be conducive to us replenishing them. And I think, unfortunately, I think you and I probably don't want to, we were talking before we started recording about this, you know, the situation and the leader of the country that is America, and, you know, and our leaders here, and, you know, a lot of the things that we're seeing and we're on the receiving end of are not conducive to us replenishing compassion. You know, things like frustration come in, and before we can be compassionate, we're frustrated. And so we have to find some way to deal with our own feelings in order to then build up compassion for others. I think that's been a lot of what explains why we're seeing a bit of a depletion of compassion.
I don't know how people get that back, because that conducive environment that you talk about, I sense that even the leaders here, actually, I'm not a political person, but I'm starting to get a little uncomfortable with how leaders are operating today. You know, when we work with leaders, whether it's one-on-one or we've got groups that we're working with, and I know this in discussions we've had, we share with leaders, you know, invite collaboration, get other points of view, don't come in and speak your mind first and shut down everybody else's perspective. And yet when we look at a lot of the leaders today, especially the more populist ones, will say, I don't know, I don't see, if I was showing a video on a leadership program of how not to lead, I'd be sharing the populist leaders and their way of dealing with this pandemic.
Well, exactly. And so, you know, at that level, the role models are, you know, dicey at best, right? And so I think that causes us to shrink inwards again. And, you know, then we pay, which is understandable, and, you know, we pay attention to fewer and fewer people, and you know, go into our little family units, and we do want to nurture our family anyway. And if we're running out of steam on, you know, being able to replenish our compassion, I'm afraid we're going to have less for people outside of our circle. And I think that's what we see happening. And I think under adverse situations, you know, research sort of backs that up, that, you know, if we're feeling more and more under threat and more things are out of our control, and all of the things that we were doing are now not working so well for us, you know, we retreat and we do fewer and fewer of those things, because somehow we're trying to protect our own sense of well-being, get through the day, you know, without being exhausted.
How do you, when you work with people, how do you help? Let me frame the question differently. When I shared with you that I wanted more balance between my life and work, you got me thinking about kind of what I wanted. But I'm wondering today, because so many of us are at home all the time, that kind of, the link between occupational and emotional, it's blurred now.
Very blurred. It's very blurred. And I think that I'm hearing that more and more with people that I'm working with. I don't know if you are, where what was a great trade up, where, wow, I'm gaining at least 2 hours a day back not commuting.
Right, I heard that.
Yeah, right, again and again. And that has to be, of course, that was true. And it was, the sun was shining and people were working at their kitchen tables and looking out at the garden with their dog if they were lucky, and all that kind of thing. Sorry about that. It's just a little alert. now I'm hearing people say, but at least when I sat on a train for half an hour, I'd gone from work, I had half an hour to kind of do a puzzle on my phone or work through the
mental wind down.
exactly, and now and I've lost that. So, coming from my study down into the kitchen, that's not far to go to decompress.
No, you've got 32 steps basically to decompress.
Steps, yeah. And actually, so I think people, what was, I wouldn't say universally, but perhaps predominantly a plus, is now not necessarily that way for people either. And now, of course, with the dark nights, it's less likely that you're going to go for a run at 6 o'clock when it's been raining for 2 hours and it's been dark for 2 hours, or
much less likely.
We can both speak to that. Will I put my tennis gear on, when I've been sort of pretending it hasn't been raining for the last 3 hours, or will I not? Will I go to the gym?
But there is that I suppose then there is that blurring, because I see when people are in an office, they see others leaving.
Yeah.
When I'm at home, I stay a little bit later.
Yeah.
Maybe I stay up a bit later as well, because the alarm's not going off at 5:10 or 6:10 to get up.
Yeah. And
so that's one of my concerns, is that blurring between occupation and emotion and family, that will start to affect us in a more kind of spiritual way, that we will lose ourselves a little bit, and then those unhelpful behaviors that we touched on start to get adopted
and start getting rampant. Well, I think that it's just highlights that very boring and yet pretty helpful idea of taking what control is appropriate and that you can. And I think that in this sort of earlier darkening evenings, etc., I think it makes sense to really, really re-examine what's the best structure for the day, for me, for you, for this person. And it could be that, somebody gave a really good example. He is a team leader, and he was saying that one of his team had said to him, look, now that it's getting so dark so early, would it be okay with you? They've been working remotely the whole time. There's no plans to go back, etc. She said to him, would you be okay if I took off from like 12 to 2 because I'm going to go riding, because I've got to get my horse exercised. I really want to, that will be helpful to me. And she said, I've been doing it obviously at 6, 7, 8 in the evening, but now, so it's a very concrete example of actually, it makes sense to really think about how, given what I've got to work with, how should I be organizing my day and therefore my week? Because otherwise I think we will run out of steam if we just operate on the old framework of we more or less work from 8 till 6 or something like that, and we take an hour off maybe. It doesn't not only doesn't it need to be that way, I think it really can't be that way in these circumstances. It isn't the healthiest framework.
And you're right, we can't, and I really like that, we can't adopt how we were before all of this kind of exploded onto the world in the way that we're living today. Because if that person doesn't take their horse out, and that's just criminal, and it's just not fair on the horse or her ultimately.
Exactly. And of course, if we're going to talk about effectiveness and performance at work as well, that person, surely we all can easily imagine, is going to be a much more effective performer doing the work she has to do, for both reasons. One, she was conferred trust and allowed to do something that was right for her to do, and she just feels a hell of a lot better. I
could imagine she comes back with a spring in her step at 2 o'clock, and probably between 2 and 5 works really well.
Exactly, feels so super good about the way that all went down, and also, grateful to her team leader, and
Right, which engenders even more loyalty,
exactly,
greater levels of motivation, and
yeah,
maybe that's where it kind of goes back to trust again. Leaders have to trust that their people know what they need, and we need
yeah,
to be having these conversations with our people
yeah,
and not shy away from them. It's
yeah,
not just about, oh, it's COVID times. Actually, what's
yeah,
going on this month?
yeah,
I don't know about you, most businesses I'm working with are only doing strategic plans for 3 months and then relooking at things.
yes, they are mainly, you're right,
I feel it should be the same for us as individuals. Make a plan for a month,
yeah,
get through to
yeah,
November, and then when you're at the end of November, think about what does December look like.
exactly, and assume that you're going to modify it,
Right.
yeah,
And then you don't end up, put my hands up, going for a run for an hour and a half every day because you've adopted an unhelpful coping mechanism.
yeah, that you've just carried forward,
Right. Because it's actually not appropriate anymore. And
yeah,
it's not helping. I think we've come a full circle on
yeah, yeah,
on that one. No, let me ask you one more question.
okay,
I start off by saying, where what have you observed in people? One of the things that always inspired me to come to you as a coach was you always left me with this feeling that I had these choices
right,
I could make. So there was always, before I would knock on your door, I always had hope
oh,
that whatever I would come out with a couple of hours later. And I remember times when I'd say to you, is it okay if I carry on? And you'd be like, yeah, go on. Because it was always cathartic, right? You would just let me speak. But so that hope was always very important to me when I would come to you.
mhm,
I would hold on to things because I know I'm coming to then talk to you. So
yeah,
driving in, it would be like, I've got this hope.
yeah,
So I would put this pressure on you. Obviously, you don't know this, but that's how I would be coming in. So then it
yeah,
inspires to leave with new coping mechanisms.
yeah,
What do you feel people could do to maintain those kind of levels of hope?
yeah.
Because life's tough right now.
It's very tough. It's very tough. Wow. I mean, again, I think it has to involve. I mean, the word that comes to mind is love. Really, is making sure that you've got the right people in your life, that you're interacting with them as much as you possibly can, that you are, we get a lot back when we give to other people, and as we were saying before, it's not our faults if we can't be, running around throwing happiness around the world, but if we can, like your mum, your family, Emma, Charlotte, people, to kind of just ground ourselves and say, how can I both give and receive love for this? Where's that going to come in to this week? As well as, how am I going to do a good job? And how am I going to be a good coach? And how am I going to try to eat healthily? And how am I going to cram some exercise in? It's actually, where am I going to give and receive some love? Because we feel better in both of those cases when we're giving it and getting it back.
I love that.
So, I mean, that might just seem like a completely bonkers answer, but I think that's what I would say.
No, it's a perfect answer, because we don't give to receive, but when we do, we feel great, others feel great, and are
Exactly.
encouraged to give as well.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I think, we talk about mental well-being and wellness, and actually, if we don't self-care,
yeah.
we are not well.
That's so right. It's so right. The self-compassion, the self-care thing. If it feels airy fairy, then don't think of it that way, but just then think, well, what am I doing in my day, in my therefore next day and therefore in this week, to help myself, if you can't, you know, because some people like, oh my God, that sounds like self-compassion. What even is that?
Right.
Well, okay, just write a few things down. What works for you? Are they present in your life? To what extent are they present? Do more of them. Find ways to do more of them.
Yeah. Charlotte likes shopping.
Well, well, I hope she can still keep going, but
Or dyeing her hair. That's another
well,
thing.
that'll never not be possible, right?
Right, precisely. And I think I'm gonna, when I push stop on the record button, I'm just gonna go for a run because it's not dark outside and it stopped raining.
Well, there you are. But, you know, remember, maybe half an hour is enough, right?
It won't be an hour and a half, for sure. Salian, it's such a pleasure and
thank
fun
you, me
as
too.
well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming on, and I'll try and bend your arm in the new year, and if we're still doing
You mean ear? I think you mean bend my ear, not
I'll
bend
bend
my
your
arm.
ear and twist your arm.
That's it.
Got my similes all wrong. I'll bend your ear and twist your arm.
Okay.
And make you come back again.
That'd be lovely. I'd be thrilled to do so. Listen, take care, and
Thank you so much.
thanks for thinking of inviting me. It's been a pleasure, honestly.
Love it. I'll see you very soon.
Okay, take
All
care.
right. Bye.